My parents spent thousands of dollars on my sister's college fund. For me, not $1. I worked 2 jobs just to survive under the same roof as people who were supposed to love me equally. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself I was fine. But the day I finally built a life nobody handed me, a life nobody could take away, my own family tried to take it anyway. Stay with me, because what happened next is the reason I don't speak to most of my family today. And by the end, you'll understand exactly why I'd make the same choice again. This is my story. If you'd asked me where this really started, I'd have said the moment my sister pulled my husband aside, 20 minutes before I walked down the aisle, and tried to talk him out of marrying me. Nobody in that room, not me, not even his mother, had any idea what Ivy had just tried to do. But by the end of that night, everything had shifted. To understand how we got there, though, you have to go back further. Years further. Back to a house where love came with conditions, and those conditions never once applied to me. Growing up in a close-knit black neighborhood on the east side of town, I learned early that love in my house came with conditions, and those conditions never applied to me. I remember being 7 years old, standing in the doorway of my sister Ivy's room, watching her rip open birthday presents wrapped in shiny paper. A bike, a dollhouse, a stack of new outfits still on the hangers. My birthday had been 3 months earlier. I'd gotten a card. My mother had smiled at me that day and said, "You're older, sweetheart. You understand. These things don't matter as much." I was 7. I didn't understand at all. I just learned, quietly, not to ask why. By 10, I'd stopped expecting my name to be called first for anything. At 11, I started noticing the way my father's face would light up the second Ivy walked into a room, and the way it simply didn't, for me. I used to practice being funnier, quieter, more helpful, more everything, testing out different versions of myself like maybe one of them would finally earn that same look. None of them ever did. Eventually I stopped trying, and just decided I'd rather be capable than loved on approval. The gap only widened as we got older. Ivy got new clothes every season and her hair done at the good salon every 2 weeks. She got a car, brand new, for her 16th birthday, with a bow on it in the driveway like something out of a commercial. An image I still can't fully shake, even now. When it came time for college, Ivy's tuition was paid in full at a 4-year university, no questions asked, no strings attached, along with a furnished dorm room and a monthly allowance on top. I, 2 years older, got hand-me-downs and a part-time job at 15 folding clothes at the mall after school. When I brought home a report card with straight A's, hoping, still hoping, even then, that maybe this time it would be enough, my mother glanced at it for 2 seconds and said, "That's good, baby. Now go start dinner. Your sister has practice." No hug, no pride in her voice, just a redirection back to being useful. When I finally worked up the courage to ask why things were so different between us, I got the same answer every time. A lecture about building character, delivered like it was a gift instead of an excuse. There's a particular kind of grief that comes from growing up invisible in your own home. Not hated, not abused in any way anyone could point to, just quietly, consistently overlooked. I didn't have a word for it as a kid. I just had the feeling of sitting at a table full of people who were supposed to love me and somehow still feeling like a guest. What people outside the family never saw was how much Ivy had absorbed the same lesson I had, just from the other direction. You know, she learned that being loved meant being first, being watched, being better than her sister, always, because that's what kept the attention flowing her way. It made her generous when she was winning, and sharp-edged the moment she felt like she wasn't. I used to catch flashes of it as kids, the tight smile when I brought home that report card, the offhand comment designed to land exactly where it would sting. I never thought much of it at the time. Sisters competed, that was normal. Or so I told myself, over and over, until I almost believed it. I could have let all of it make me bitter. Some nights, alone in my room doing homework, while I could hear Ivy laughing with our parents downstairs, I came close, but somewhere along the way, the hurt turned into something else. Determination maybe, or just plain refusal, A quiet decision that I would not spend my whole life waiting for people who'd already shown me, over and over, where I ranked. By 18, I was working 2 jobs and taking night classes toward a degree in accounting, with my eye on transferring once I'd saved enough. My grandmother, the one relative who never played favorites, who always slipped me a little extra cash for gas and a Sunday dinner plate wrapped in foil to take home, used to tell me, "Baby, they can't take what you build with your own 2 hands." I held onto that line like a lifeline. I budgeted down to the dollar, taught myself basic car repair-off videos late at night, and figured out how to make rent stretch when it shouldn't have. Nobody was coming to save me, so I became the kind of person who didn't need saving. That strength is what carried me through my degree, through my first job at a small firm downtown, and eventually, into a life I built entirely on my own terms. If you're the kind of person who had to fight for what your siblings got handed to them, you already know exactly where this is going. Hit subscribe now, because this channel is full of stories just like mine. I met Julian at a farmer's market on a Saturday morning, both of us reaching for the last bag of the good coffee beans at the same stall. He let me have it, then bought a second bag, just so he'd have an excuse to keep talking to me. He made me laugh within 5 minutes. He listened like it mattered within 20. What I noticed first wasn't that Julian came from money. It was that he never once made me feel like I needed to catch up to him. He asked about my 2 jobs and night school years like they were the most impressive thing he'd ever heard, not something to be embarrassed about. Julian's mother, Corinne, was the kind of woman people described as formidable and meant it as the highest compliment. She'd built her own architecture firm from a spare bedroom into a company with offices in 3 cities. When Julian brought me home for the first time, Corinne didn't interrogate me. She recognized me. 2 self-made black women, 25 years apart, understood each other instantly. "You remind me of myself," Corinne told me over tea that first visit. "Nobody handed you anything, and you built something good anyway. That's rare. Don't let anyone talk you out of being proud of it." For the first time in my life, I had someone in my corner who saw my hard work as a strength, not a punchline. It was a small thing to say out loud, but it landed somewhere deep. A wound I hadn't realized was still open, finally starting to close. Julian proposed at the same farmer's market, 11 months later, next to the same coffee stall. I said yes before he'd even finished the sentence. When I called to tell Ivy, her congratulations came a beat too late, and a half step too flat. I noticed it. I just didn't know yet how much it would matter. My parents attended the wedding, technically. They showed up, took photos, made small talk that somehow always circled back to Ivy. I'd stopped expecting more than that a long time ago, and I'd made peace with it. This day wasn't about earning their approval. It was about the life I was choosing. And what a life it was turning out to be. The ceremony was outdoors, string lights strung between the trees as the sun went down, my grandmother in the front row in her Sunday best. A gospel trio I'd grown up singing along with in church opened the reception, and later the whole room got up for the electric slide before the night was through. Julian stood at the altar looking at me like I was the only person there. My friends had flown in from 3 states. The people who actually loved me were there, fully, without conditions. Ivy, though, had been off all day. Quiet during photos, short with the bridesmaids. I chalked it up to nerves. I was wrong about how far it would go. About 20 minutes before the ceremony, Ivy found Julian alone outside the groom's suite. She didn't waste time on small talk. "I probably shouldn't say anything," she started, "but you deserve to know what you're walking into. Nora was still texting her ex a few months ago. I saw the messages myself. I don't want you finding out after the ring's already on." It was a lie, invented whole, but it landed exactly where she meant it to. Julian went quiet for a moment. Then he did something Ivy hadn't planned for. He asked to see the messages. She didn't have any. She stammered something about deleting them, about not wanting to start drama, and in that stammer, Julian heard everything he needed to. "Ivy," he said quietly, "I love Nora. I trust her completely. If this is really about looking out for me, you'd have brought proof, not a feeling. I think you should go find your seat." He walked back inside without raising his voice once. She didn't stop there. During the reception, Ivy approached Corinne's table with a phone in her hand and a story already rehearsed, a screenshot she'd doctored herself. "I wasn't going to say anything," Ivy said, "but I think you deserve to know who's really marrying into this family." Corinne looked at the phone for a long moment. Then she looked at Ivy. She'd spent 30 years in business reading people who wanted something from her, and forged screenshots were, frankly, an amateur's move. "Sweetheart," Corinne said, handing the phone back without a trace of anger in her voice, which somehow made it worse. "I build buildings for a living. I know when something's been drawn up to collapse under its own weight. This is one of those things." She stood, smoothed her dress, and added, "I'd be careful about what you're willing to destroy, just because you can't stand to watch someone else be happy." Ivy walked away from that table with her face burning, and didn't attempt a third move. Later that night, after the tension had softened and the dance floor was full, Corinne asked the room for a moment. "Nora," she said, holding my gaze deliberately, "from the day I met you, you showed me who you are through what you do, not what you say. So Julian and I want to give you both something that's yours. No debt, no strings, just a start." She handed us an envelope. Inside were the keys and the deed to a house 4 miles from her own, fully paid, fully ours. I cried, not the polite kind of crying people do at weddings, the real kind, the kind that comes from finally being given something simply because you're loved, not because you earned it. Julian held my hand and didn't say anything. Just let me feel it. I wouldn't find out what my sister had tried to do that day until much later, and when I finally did, it would explain a lot about everything that came after. If you've ever had someone try to sabotage your happiest moment out of pure envy, comment, "I understand," below. Because trust me, this story is about to get a lot deeper. And if you haven't already, subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. The truth came out about a week after we got back from the honeymoon, on an ordinary Tuesday night, over takeout containers still open on the counter. I'd asked, half joking, why Ivy had disappeared for almost the entire cocktail hour. Julian went quiet in a way I recognized immediately, so he told me, all of it. The moment outside the groom's suite, the fabricated story about my ex, the doctored screenshot, the same rehearsed line she'd used twice in 1 hour. I sat with it for a long moment, feeling something complicated settle in my chest. Not shock, exactly. I'd known my sister's edges my whole life. But there was something different about hearing that she'd actively tried to reach into the one day that was supposed to be untouchably mine and take it apart from the inside, twice, in the span of an hour. "Why didn't you tell me before the honeymoon?" I asked. "Because none of it worked," Julian said simply, "and I wasn't going to let one bad hour take up space in the best week of our lives." I appreciated that more than I could say, but I also understood that something between me and Ivy had shifted permanently in that unwitnessed hour, even if she never knew that I knew. It sat quietly in the back of my mind in the weeks after, reframing little things I might have otherwise brushed off, a comment here, a strange excuse there, until I started to realize just how long she'd probably been keeping score without me ever noticing the game had started. We came back from our honeymoon tanned, happy, and completely unprepared for what was waiting at my parents' kitchen table. Ivy was engaged now herself, and had put a deposit down on a wedding venue neither of them could actually afford. My parents had already decided what that meant. Our new house should be sold, and the proceeds handed to Ivy to cover it. "She needs it more than you do," my mother said, like this was simply obvious. "You two can figure something else out. You always do." My father didn't even look up from his coffee when he said it, like the whole conversation was a formality, like my answer had already been decided for me the moment they sat me down. That was the part that got me, honestly. Not the ask itself, the certainty behind it. 29 years old, married, standing in a kitchen I hadn't lived in for over a decade, and they still fully expected me to just hand something over because they'd told me to. There it was again, the same old math. My needs were negotiable, Ivy's were not. But something had changed. I wasn't 18 anymore, scraping by and hoping someone would finally notice me. I had Julian beside me, steady as ever, his hand finding mine under the table without either of us planning it. I had a life I'd built, and a marriage grounded in equality, not obligation, and I had, for the first time, a version of family that didn't require me to disappear. No, I said. Just that. Calm, clear, final. My mother's face did something I'd never seen it do before. A kind of flicker, like the script she'd been running her whole life had just glitched. After everything we've done for you, she started, and I remember almost laughing, not because it was funny, but because I genuinely couldn't think of a single thing to point to. My father tried a different angle, something about family loyalty, about how real family sacrifices for each other. I sat there and let both of them talk, and for the first time in my life, none of it landed anywhere near where it used to. My parents didn't take it well. When calm refusal didn't work, they went around me entirely and showed up unannounced at Corinne's office, telling her I was being selfish and ungrateful, twisting the story until it barely resembled the truth. Ivy, I would later learn, had been the one to plant the idea in their heads in the first place. They picked the wrong person to lie to. Corinne had spent decades reading people for a living. It took her one conversation to see exactly what was happening, and it lined up precisely with what had happened at the wedding. She didn't yell. She didn't need to. Corinne's power had never come from volume. It came from precision. She let my parents finish their whole speech, apparently, without interrupting once, nodding along at exactly the right moments, the way you'd let a child finish explaining why the dog definitely ate their homework. And when they were done, she asked one question. Have either of you asked Nora, directly, why she said no? Neither of them had. That silence told her everything she needed to know. As it happened, her firm had just signed off on the financing referral for a retail complex my father had spent 2 years trying to get built. She simply withdrew the referral and told him plainly that she didn't do business, professional or otherwise, with people who lied to manipulate her family. Without that referral, the deal my father had been counting on for 2 years collapsed. The comfortable cushion that had always made Ivy's life smoother than mine started to crack along with it. It's strange, looking back, how quiet the whole thing was. No shouting, no dramatic showdown, just one calm phone call from a woman who'd simply decided she was done, pretending not to see what was right in front of her. Here's the part almost nobody saw coming, including Ivy herself. Her fiancé Preston, it turned out, had proposed fast, and a large part of what he'd been counting on, quietly, was a wedding funded by her parents, and a lifestyle he assumed came standard with the family name. When the money dried up, he didn't stick around to find out who Ivy actually was underneath it. Within 4 months, the engagement was over. Ivy was left with a canceled venue deposit she couldn't get back, a ring she wasn't sure whether to keep, and a question she'd spent her whole life avoiding: who was actually in her corner when there was nothing left to gain from her? It was, in its own painful way, a mirror. Ivy had spent years learning that being loved meant being chosen over someone else, first over me, then, without realizing it, choosing a partner who loved what came attached to her more than he loved her. I, meanwhile, had built something with Julian that had never once depended on what either of us could offer the other. I didn't celebrate any of it. When I heard, I felt something closer to sadness than satisfaction, a quiet recognition that my sister had never been taught a version of love that didn't require competition, and now she was finding out, the hard way, what that had cost her. If a story like this has ever hit close to home for you, drop a comment and let me know. And if you want more real stories about family, betrayal, and finding your own peace, subscribe to the channel. There's a lot more where this came from. Here's the part worth sitting with. None of what happened to my family was something I wanted. I never asked Corinne to intervene. I never wished collapse on my parents' finances or my sister's engagement. What I wanted, all I'd ever wanted, was simply to be treated like I mattered too. The consequences that followed weren't my doing. They were the natural result of a family that had spent years building on manipulation and favoritism instead of honesty, and finding out, all at once, that none of it could hold weight when it was finally tested. Julian and I, watching it unfold, made a decision that had nothing to do with punishment and everything to do with peace. We stepped back, fully, not out of anger, but out of clarity. You can love people from a distance when staying close costs you your own well-being. I finally gave myself permission to stop auditioning for a love that was never going to be offered freely. This is where the story could have ended sadly. It didn't. Julian and I settled into our home, the one that was truly, unquestionably ours, and built something neither of us had fully had before. A family defined by choice, not obligation. Corinne became less like an in-law and more like the mother I always deserved, showing up for the small things as much as the big ones. My grandmother became a fixture at Sunday dinners too, delighted to finally see her granddaughter surrounded by people who cherished her the way she always had. A year later, I did something that surprised even me. I left the firm and started my own accounting practice, with a special focus on helping other Black-owned small businesses get their finances in order, using the same discipline that had gotten me through those early scraping-by years. Corinne mentored me without ever taking over. Julian believed in me before the numbers gave anyone else reason to. Within 2 years, the practice was thriving, not because someone handed it to me, but because for the first time, I had both the freedom to try and people cheering for me instead of measuring me against someone else. As for Ivy, the door was never fully closed. I reached out, once things settled, not to gloat but simply to ask how she was doing. It was a short, careful conversation, not a reunion, just a crack of light left open, in case my sister ever wanted to walk through it and try building something real instead of something borrowed. I still think about my younger self sometimes, the girl doing homework after a closing shift, wondering why she wasn't enough. I wish I could tell her, you were always enough. You just hadn't found the people who could see it yet. I wish I could tell her that the version of family she kept trying to earn her way into was never the only version available to her, that somewhere out there was a woman named Corinne who'd recognize her instantly, a man named Julian who'd never once make her feel like she needed to catch up, a grandmother who already saw exactly what she was worth and never stopped saying so. Every hard year taught me something that made the good years possible. Every time I was overlooked, I learned to trust my own judgment instead of waiting for permission. Every dollar I earned myself taught me I didn't need anyone's approval to know my own worth. And when the right people finally did show up, Julian, Corinne, the family I chose, I was ready to let them in fully, without the walls that spite might have built, without spending our whole relationship testing whether they'd eventually disappoint me the way everyone else had. That's the real ending here. Not the collapse of a deal, not my sister's broken engagement, not the fallout with my parents, but a woman who spent years being told she was less, and who built a life that proved, quietly and completely, otherwise. Not through revenge, not through proving anybody wrong on purpose, just by refusing, finally, to keep shrinking herself down to a size that made other people comfortable. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's simply building a life so full and so genuinely yours that the people who doubted you become irrelevant to it, not because you pushed them out, but because you finally outgrew the need for their approval. If this story meant something to you, make sure you're subscribed, because I share stories like this every single week. Turn on notifications so you never miss the next one, and if you made it all the way to the end, drop a comment and tell me which part hit you the hardest. See you in the next story.